Hey there, guys. Dr. Paul here. Got an idea for you today. I'm just messing around a little bit here with the latest technology provided by Substack, and I'm going hands free, trying to leverage my time a little bit since I have some long commutes. So I thought I would share with you a topic inspired by starting to publish again in Psychology Today magazine, write some articles. And as I've been following along in there, I saw a list of the most popular articles, and an evergreen topic tends to come up here and there, which can be kind of a vague topic. Therefore, it's not always the most popular concept that people want to learn about because it's a little bit abstract in its nature, and that is personal boundaries. So there was an article on personal boundaries that I saw, and every once in a while I see these. They almost always exclusively reference Cloud and Townsend's famous book, which is a reasonable book. It's entirely textual in nature, and it always kind of reminds me I ought to more frequently and vividly give talks to people about boundaries uh, in article form as opposed to just live seminars, because boundaries, more I think than anything in psychology, lend themselves to visual depiction. Because after all, think about psychology. Psychology is invisible, and yet it's quite real. Even Freud, the originator of modern psychology, tried to use physics analogies to help people see in their mind's eye what psychology is, even though he called it the talking cure, which is word based, because Freud came around the time of the most popular philosophy of the day was the linguists, and the linguists believed that the mind is structured like a language, that our minds are meant for digesting stories and learning from stories. Which, if you're an anthropologist or a literary person in general, or you love novels, films, we all love cinema. Looking at psychology through cinema is kind of, you know, one of my big things. And certainly Rob Henderson, for example, Jordan Peterson. When I work with Jeremy Fox, we talk a lot about movies and television. And film is just perfect for taking Freud's idea of the talking cure, which is all words and linguistics, but making it visual for people through good acting. Well, we can even go one level beyond that, especially with boundaries, which I think is the most important topic in psychology, believe it or not. And it's the biggest pain point for humans, for individuals, for couples in romance, and for society in general. It's the cause of all of our ills, and it's really the keystone to anti-narcissism. It's the keystone to um, identifying narcissism in others, in ourselves, eliminating it, growing out of it. Technically, boundaries are one of the three pillars of character maturity and virtue. So they're so important. So there's a way of kind of fleshing this up, putting flesh on the bones, so to speak, of boundaries to understand them in a more compelling and they're by way of visual understanding sort of way. So why don't we talk about that since the topic came up? Let's go through kind of a verbal description of them, which is the Cloud and Townsend approach, but I'm going to be adding diagrams that I've been using since 1999 to teach people about boundaries. Um, so there's all these facets to them that I'm going to lay out for you. We only have maybe 20 minutes or so. And there are going to be three anatomical features to boundaries for us to cover. And I'm going to show them visually through my diagrams from 1999. You'll see in the post. And so let's get started. So, boundaries are, as we said, psychology is invisible but real. Well, boundaries are so vivid in that uh, metaphor because they are like the border of a country. They have all the same functions of the border of a country, only it's your own private country, and you're the only citizen, even in a marriage, even in a family, in friendships, in a workplace. You are your own country. Now, you may form alliances with other countries, or you may join leagues of nations, like if you're working for a company or you're in a family, where there's still negotiation over this border that is called the personal boundary. It has all the same functions: um, immigration function, trade, tariffs, deal making, um, setting standards for who you're going to let in, who you're going to befriend, who you're going to ally with, and who you're going to avoid diplomatically using your boundary. Um, so it's deal making. The point is, just like if you go to the border of a country, you don't necessarily see a painted dotted line on the ground. And yet, if you cross it, there are terms and conditions for doing that, and there are consequences for violating it. The notion of violating uh, someone else's border or boundary, or someone doing that to you, is that wrong has been done if the terms and conditions set by you, hopefully communicated by you, are violated or communicated by them. So, just like the border of a country. In fact, you could look at any harm of any kind, interpersonally or intergroup or intertribe or internationally, where we would say conflict has occurred or erupted, means there's been a boundary violation, at least in the perception and communication of one party's part. So this ought to be interesting to you. Um, Now, I'd like you to imagine a circle. That's what I use to depict them two-dimensionally, although they are three-dimensional. They're like a sphere. I'm going to draw this for you in the article in the post. So this circle is make it a solid circle, and then imagine a couple things about the nature of the boundary. Two more metaphors for how does it work besides being the border of a country, an invisible marker of that border. For one, the boundary operates just like a shield, and it is a shield against what we would all call stress. Now, I define stress when I lecture people in maybe a unique way. I don't define the randomness of nature or acts of God or hurricanes, tornadoes, typhoons, blizzards, bad economies, traffic, the randomness of the environment. I don't define as a stress technically, for the reason that it means us no harm and it means us no aid. It's random. We could really go into some films like Into the Wild, um, is a film with uh, Emil Hirsch as the star, where he believes nature could be his father. He has a narcissistic father, so he learns to somewhat be a survivalist. He goes off into Alaska, thinking nature will help him or assist him in some way, but he discovers tragically he dies. Tragically, he discovers nature doesn't mean to help us. It also doesn't intentionally mean to hurt us. So I leave that out of the definition of stress because we could either realize this and work with it and do our best to survive in it or make it work for us using our boundary, or not. We can screw that up like Emil Hirsch's character. Instead, I define stress as something caused by the interpersonal relations with others. In other words, we stress each other. Stress has an intentionality to it, in other words, within the environment caused by others with free will. Okay, that's part, you've never heard me describe it that way before, but that's really what I mean by it. And I described there being two types of general stress. This will make logical sense to you. Stress either comes in to hurt us, do us harm, or it comes in to take from us, to steal resources, to maybe threaten to steal resources. Okay, that, and the end result of that you could call loss. So stresses are either hurts or losses. Hurt causes anger if it comes in does us harm. Loss causes anxiety, or the threat of loss causes us anxiety if it gets into the boundary. So stress, and the boundary is when it's solid, a solid circle, it's a shield against stress. However, when it has the first anatomical feature I want to tell you about boundaries being a hole in the boundary, stress can just get right in. So a hurt can just come right in, and we feel like there's nothing we can do about it. We feel helpless, depressive. You know, helplessness is one of the symptoms of depression. We feel sad if a hurt gets in, and we just let it in through a hole in the boundary. And we don't usually realize that there are holes in our boundaries. Or if loss gets in, then we feel anxious, we feel anxiety, we feel helpless once again. Maybe we feel helpless if we're anxious and hopeless if we're hurt. So stress gets in through holes. When the boundary's solid, it's a shield. So the boundary is a shield against stress when we don't have a lot of holes in it. The other thing the boundary does, if you imagine a circle, and imagine we all have psychological resources on the inside. There are all kinds of resources. There are even material resources, right? There's your money, your income, your home, your alliances, friendships, network, your business you built, your car. There are physical things, but at the root, we have several very core psychological resources. One is our free will to make decisions. And lawyers, judges, and courts even define a person as being an entity with cognitive, emotional, and volitional capacity. Volitional means the power of choice. So, free will, decision making. We have our thoughts, we have our beliefs and thoughts, our education, our experience. Those are ideas, the cognitive. And then we have an emotional resource of two types, I believe, at least, probably just two types. We call self esteem. And in my lecturing, I'll describe, and you start to see this in the research of the last 20 years, these terms being used. Well-being is one type of self-esteem. It's a self-esteem of feeling satisfied or nourished or full, or one's needs having been met, having enough of what you need. That's well-being. The other, and that blocks the stress of hurt, or it counters it. It's the opposite of hurt. It's what's depleted if you let hurt in. Well-being. Your well-being is hurt or diminished. The other type of self-esteem is confidence, and confidence is the antidote for anxiety, and it is what helps block loss. Hurt uh, is blocked by well-being, and is what is well-being is depleted by hurt if hurt gets in. Confidence is depleted by loss if loss gets in to the boundary. They're like matter and antimatter, self-esteem and stress. So confidence. Confidence is, I define it as the capacity to withstand risk, change, loss, and uncertainty and still function. Okay? So it's a type of self-esteem. Anyway, the point was the boundary works as a shield, but and we were talking about resources. The boundary also works as a tank, like a gas tank contains your gasoline, also could contain your oil. Um, Gasoline is like confidence. Confidence is like gasoline. Well being is like oil. It makes the machinery run smoother if you have your needs met. Gasoline is like the energy of action. Confidence is needed to tolerate risk, change, loss, and uncertainty. In other words, to go for goals. If you're in a car like I am now, then you have a goal of arriving somewhere. To arrive there, I need the gasoline to be the energy of action to get me to my goal. So the boundary is like a shield and it's like a tank. You heard me mention the first of three types of boundary anatomy in my definitions. And this goes way beyond Cloud and Townsend. That's my point here. I really want you to understand it in a practical way. If you have holes in your boundary, which we all do, they would be like windows in your house that you're looking out of, and you don't realize you're looking out a window. What would the wall of the boundary tell us if the wall didn't have a window? It would tell us the limits of our house. If you were a country of your own and you're the only citizen, it would tell you the limits of your country. It would tell you the limits of the land you own, the limits of your laws and rules for your country. It would be the limit of what is you and what belongs to you, and ultimately what you control. The limit of what you control in life is the boundary itself. What's beyond the boundary, you have zero control of. So in my diagrams, I'll write 100% control on the inside of the circle, and I will write 0% on the outside. It's an all or nothing thing. What's inside you, 100% control. What's outside your boundary, you 0% control. Back to a hole in the boundary. If you're looking out a hole in your own boundary, you wouldn't see yourself looking out that hole. You'd be looking and looking and looking into the distance, and it would feel to you as if you should own and control everything you see because you don't see a wall yet. So it feels to you like you own all of that, everything you see, almost like a cat in a house looking out a window. The cat, I'm told, thinks it owns all territory as far as it can see. So you're like that. You're like a cat when you look out a hole in your own boundary and you don't realize it is a hole. How would you then behave? You would behave in an entitled way, like you own it all, like you deserve it all, even though you haven't set goals and reached them and achieved them truly. You act entitled. You act omnipotent, omniscient. Guess what? All the features of narcissism are how you act. Entitled, omnipotent, omniscient. You're a know-it-all. Um, you just take things for granted. In fact, you just take things from others and feel entitled in doing so. When you have a hole, so a hole in the boundary is a place that we also have other words for. We've called them buttons that people push. They aren't literal buttons on your body. They're gaps where you are, quote, sensitive or hypersensitive to others, where the comments of others, the emotions of others, the actions of others that aren't intended to harm you, they're just being done around you in the environment. You're oversensitive to them because they can just get right in that hole in your boundary. The hole in the boundary belongs to you. It's your problem, your fault, not the fault of the others, which, by the way, is a very visual, graphic depiction of where did this term microaggressions come from. Micro means a millionth. So a millionth of an aggression. Who's responsible for that if a millionth of an aggression happens to drift into the holes in your boundary that are yours? Well, you get upset, right? The other person didn't mean anything by it because they're used to operating with people with good boundaries, not narcissistic boundaries that holes help define narcissistic boundaries. What ultimately, well, another word, issues. When we say you have issues, haven't you ever wondered what does that mean exactly? What is having an issue? Having an issue means you have a sensitivity to a certain area of life. It could be money, finances, children, marriage, family, um, geography, politics, religion, whatever it is that you have a sensitivity to, that's your issue. So a hole in the boundary has other terms for it. It's the buttons people push and you're too easily sensitive to. It's your problem, your fault. They are the issues that you have. You need to go to psychotherapy for, perhaps. And they are weaknesses. When we say somebody is weak or strong, we don't often mean their muscles. For example, my elderly grandmother, when she was alive, was very strong, and yet she was about 5 foot tall and not very muscular. Was she strong because of her muscles? No, she was strong because what she said goes. She was serious about things. She set boundaries. Her strength is the strength of her boundaries. When we say something's weak, that's weak, or a person is weak, or we have said weak of character. What exactly does that mean? It's speaking to the solidness of the boundary of the person. In other words, how many holes are in their boundary? So ultimately, what does a hole do? It opens up in an illusory way a sense of ownership and entitlement to everything outside the boundary erroneously. It's false. It's a false sense of security and ownership, and it's caused by looking out that hole. What do these holes then cause? Ultimately, they are a place where we actually don't have control of something outside of us, yet we think we do have control. We think we should have control. So the operative word is should. And what this means is that boundary holes are what cause us to do what Buddhists would say is suffering. Suffering is trying to control the uncontrollable and burning energy, wasting energy trying to do so. Burning energy trying to control what we don't control and wasting energy and time and decision making doing so. And a key word is the word should. The way to figure out where do I suffer in life? Where do I try to control things that I don't through a hole in my boundary? It's wherever I use the word should. When others are trying to control me and have poor boundaries with me because they have holes, narcissistic holes in their boundary, it's where they're telling me what should be, the way things should work. Traffic should go faster. This applies to the error of thinking nature is either for us or against us too. That blizzard shouldn't have happened. I needed to take a flight and the flight was delayed. Traffic should move faster. People should be more courteous if they're not. The economy should go better. Should. Every time we say the word should, we're wishing we controlled something that we don't. And every time somebody else says the word should toward us or around us, they're wishing they controlled something that they don't. That's where the holes in the boundary are. What else can happen? Um, let's define trauma vis-a-vis boundaries. Stress, we can accept or block or reject using our boundary. Or if we have a hole, stress gets in too easily. But we also could have a good boundary and have stress so powerful, so intense energetically that it busts a hole in our boundary against our will. even though we see it happen, that's a trauma. Literally a literal there are all kinds of definitions of trauma. Jeremy can talk to you about that. But a boundary way of describing trauma is it's an overwhelming stress that busts into us even though we said no to it. So the key to patching holes in your boundary is using the word no, saying it and tolerating hearing it with gracefulness, which would be like surrendering to it or acknowledging or accepting a lack of control. Radical acceptance would be a way of patching a hole in a boundary. So the word no helps fix boundary holes. And when we say the word should or hear the word should, that's a boundary hole. Trauma breaks a hole in our boundary against our will. So holes in the boundary are relevant to trauma too. And ultimately, here I am arriving. Ultimately, uh, we don't want to be weak. We want to be strong, like my grandma. We want to patch holes in our boundaries. And the way to do that is using the word no, saying it more often and hearing it gracefully, surrendering, radical acceptance of what we don't control. One of the useful things about Buddhism, but also useful about many, many of the world's religions that teach us about boundaries. In fact, even psychotherapeutic modalities like Alcoholics Anonymous, any 12-step program has something like the serenity prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. That's outside the boundary. The courage to change the things I can. That's inside the boundary. The wisdom to know the difference between what's outside and inside my control is what? The boundary itself. That's why 12-step programs are helpful in some cases. They teach boundaries in kind of a visual way, the wisdom to know the difference, what I control and what I don't. So practice saying no when you mean no, and practice tolerating hearing no gracefully without getting upset, and just let it be and redirect your efforts toward goals. That's how to make a boundary grow legitimately. How to grow more control in life occurs through setting goals, striving for them, missing the mark until you finally get there. Once you get to a goal, is it called a goal anymore? No, it's an achievement. It's part of you, which means that's how you make boundaries grow legitimately in control of your surroundings. You reach goals. Um, and then you strengthen the boundary. Use the word no, tolerate hearing the word no. That's how you fix holes in the boundary. Many, many ways to fix trauma. Most important one probably is EMDR type of therapy to fix the beliefs and the negative, the stresses. Post traumatic stress disorder. We even use the word stress clinically right there. Post traumatic stress disorder, acute stress disorder, stress disorder. That means stress has gotten in. Now it's in you, and you own it. It's part of you. It's part of your memories. It needs processed, fixed, so that the damage to your self esteem and probably damage to your core sense of self and dignity and instincts, called shame, needs let out again, out into the universe, so that you don't have that negative energy anymore in you, including shame. And now you can reconfigure what you believe, make it more positive and optimistic, including your view of yourself, your self cognitions. That's all EMDR trauma therapy concepts. But what about the boundary itself, the damage to it? That needs fixed too. And the way to fix that, the holes, is getting acquainted again with the word no, being able to say it, being able to hear it gracefully. Um, why was I talking about trauma? Because the second type of anatomy of the boundary I call walls. Like imagine a steel wall. When a trauma has occurred and it's busted a hole in the boundary against your will and damage has been done, you're weak. You feel weak. You're draining your resources, your time, your energy, your thoughts are getting spent on the trauma. maybe for years, where you ruminate and suffer, and eventually you might grow a wall. And it is a little healing to do so in exactly the same way as a scar on a physical wound of your skin. A scar. A scar is an attempt of your body to repair that skin quickly and establish the barrier again against harm, toxicity out in the physical environment that caused the wound in your skin in the first place. Well, there's a psychological scar in a traumatized person. I call it a wall. And it's that area of life where you now have a wall and previously had a hole is now where you say no, 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 always, all the time to everything going on in your environment. So a traumatized person might isolate from friends, from society, from their family. They prefer aloneness. That's the scar talking. It's saying no to any interactions with others. You may have heard people hurt in love and romance say, I will never love again. I will never marry again. I will never allow subject myself to that risk again. They're saying no permanently to that issue of life, which now is an issue. And so a wall does strengthen you somewhat, but imagine a scar. It's rigid, it's not flexible, it's not adaptive, it's just protective. So it's better than having a hole in the boundary to have a wall. But what would a wall around your entire boundary do if you were so traumatized and scarred that you just had a universal wall around you? Well, you'd be protected for the time being, but you'd have no trade or interaction interpersonally. You would not find love, for example. You would not find friendship, support. You're isolated. So eventually, you're protected against further harm, but now you're going to starve. You're going to starve for the interpersonal goodness with good others of high character and virtue, not narcissists. You're going to miss out on that if all you have is walls. So it's a temporary stopgap measure that protects you like a scar on your skin does. But eventually, the scar, hopefully, if it's just a scab, and the scab eventually could fall off, and now you have flexible, adaptive skin again, unless you do have a scar. Then you carry a scar long term, which can happen in trauma too. So that's a wall. Now, the only mature, virtuous, non narcissistic, anti narcissistic anatomy of the boundary, let's finish with this. I call it a door. A door in the boundary is neither a hole nor a wall, it is adaptive and dynamic. It's the only kind of boundary anatomy that's dynamic because a door can open and close. It could open and close for the very same person who used to be kind of rotten, kind of a jerk to you. And if you had a hole to that person, then they were hurting you all the time, narcissistic, abusing you. And you eventually learned, I'm just going to shut that person out of my life forever. And you made a wall to them. And then, you felt you didn't have a mother anymore. You didn't have a brother. You didn't have a father. You didn't have a friend. You didn't have a spouse. You just put up a wall. If you had a door, you could always, always close the door to bad behavior or narcissistic behavior and consider opening the door every single time the person behaved benevolently or with beneficence, goodness, win-win behavior, as you hear me describe. John Nash equilibrium from game theory is what I use to describe the mechanics of your door, of your boundary. Open it for win-win behavior in others, close it for win-lose narcissistic behavior in others. By the way, by having a door in your boundary, you become a leader, a parent, a mature person, what they like calling these days emotionally intelligent person. I like using the old term mature person with character, maturity, and goodness, virtue. Aristotle and the ancient philosophers called it virtue. But you become a leader where you you have self-discipline. Discipline is saying no to yourself. Self-discipline is saying no to yourself, which is anti-hole in the boundary. It's closing the door to things you don't want to be a part of that aren't good for you or others. Open the door, which is win-win behavior, for goodness, for mutual